Welcome to Curious Nightmares, the channel where your fears and deepest curiosities collide. Prepare for spine-tingling tales and eerie explorations into the supernatural. Subscribe and stay tuned for hair-raising stories.
The Unseen Visitor, Terror on Maple Street. I always believed Maple Street was just like any other street in our little town of Eldridge, quiet, serene, and uneventful. That was until the autumn of 2022, when something unexplainable began to haunt our neighborhood. It was a crisp October evening when I first sensed it. My parents were out, and I was home alone, enjoying the rare tranquility. The house, an old Victorian building my parents were so proud of, always made unsettling noises. But that night, the creaks and groans of the floorboards seemed more pronounced, more deliberate. I was in the living room, engrossed in a book, when a sharp knock at the front door jolted me. Thinking it was my parents, I hurried to answer but found no one there. Puzzled, I closed the door, attributing it to a prank by neighborhood kids. As I settled back into my reading, a cold draft swept through the room. I shivered, pulling my sweater tighter around me. I heard it then, a faint whisper, almost like a sigh, coming from the hallway. My heart raced. I called out, thinking maybe my parents had returned and were trying to surprise me. No answer. With a sense of unease creeping up my spine, I ventured into the hallway. The whisper had stopped, and the only sound was the thumping of my own heart. I checked the front door. It was securely locked. Feeling foolish yet unsettled, I returned to the living room. The night progressed without further incident, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, a product of an overactive imagination. The next day, I shared my experience with my best friend Alex, who lived a few doors down. I expected him to laugh it off, but the look on his face told a different story. "You heard it too?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Heard what?" I pressed, a knot forming in my stomach. "The whispers and the knocks. It's been happening in my house too. At first I thought I was imagining things, but my sister heard them as well." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening on Maple Street. I stood there as I tried to process Alex's words. It couldn't be a coincidence. I am someone who always prided herself on rationality, found myself grappling with the reality of something beyond normal explanation. That evening, the unease inside me grew. As darkness fell over Maple Street, a palpable sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I decided to stay in my bedroom, the only place in the house where I felt somewhat secure. Lying in bed, I tried to lose myself in a book, but the words blurred before my eyes. The house was eerily silent, amplifying the pounding of my heart. Then it started, a faint tapping sound against my bedroom window. I froze, my eyes darting towards the source of the noise. There was nothing but the dark outline of the trees swaying in the wind. The tapping continued, persistent and rhythmic. Gathering every ounce of courage, I forced myself out of bed and tiptoed towards the window. As I drew the curtains, my breath caught in my throat. There, reflected in the glass, was a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the empty room. I couldn't dismiss it as my imagination this time. The fear that gripped me was visceral, real. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, jumping at every creak and whisper the house offered. The next day, I decided to investigate. This unseen visitor, this entity, had to have a reason for its presence. I started by visiting the local library, delving into the history of Eldridge and, specifically, Maple Street. Hours of research led me to a startling discovery. My house, along with several others on the street, was built on the grounds of an old estate that had burned down a century ago, under mysterious circumstances. Armed with this information, I returned home, determined to uncover more. As night approached, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The air grew colder, denser. I lit a fire in the living room fireplace, its flickering light casting dancing shadows across the walls. Then, it happened, the sound of footsteps upstairs. I was alone in the house, or so I had thought. My heart raced as I slowly ascended the staircase. The footsteps grew louder, more frantic, as if someone or something was pacing. Reaching the top, I hesitated before turning into the hallway. The air was thick with an unspoken menace. The sound of the footsteps had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I stepped forward, my every instinct screaming at me to flee. That's when I saw it. a fleeting shadow darting into one of the rooms. Gathering all my courage, I followed. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the wind. I approached cautiously, peering into the darkness outside. For a moment, there was nothing, and then, two glowing eyes appeared in the shadows, staring back at me with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This was no ghost or benign spirit. There was a malevolence to its presence, a sense of anger and unrest. I needed to find out more, to understand what it wanted, why it was tied to Maple Street, and most importantly, how to stop it. For days, I immersed myself in Eldridge's past, uncovering stories buried deep within the town's archives. The more I learned, the more the nocturnal disturbances intensified, as if the entity was aware of my prying. One evening, while rummaging through old newspapers, I stumbled upon a chilling revelation. The estate that once stood where my house now resides was owned by a reclusive man, rumored to be involved in dark and forbidden practices. His name was Jonathan Harker, and his sudden, unexplained disappearance 100 years ago had been the talk of the town. As I delved deeper, I found references to Harker's obsession with the occult and his quest for immortality. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but with each discovery, the presence in my house grew stronger, more aggressive. The turning point came on a stormy night. The electricity flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. I lit candles, their dim glow barely piercing the oppressive blackness. Then I heard it, a low, menacing laugh echoing through the halls, sending shivers down my spine. Fearing for my safety, I decided to confront whatever haunted Maple Street. I made my way to the attic, the laughter growing louder with each step. The attic was a place I avoided, its gloomy expanse filled with relics of the past. As I entered, the air turned icy cold. In the flickering candlelight, I saw them, old, dusty tomes with strange symbols, presumably belonging to Jonathan Harker. The laughter ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. I approached the books, and as I touched one, a whirlwind of images flooded my mind. Harker's experiments, his descent into madness, and a ritual gone terribly wrong. In his quest for eternal life, Harker had unleashed something dark, something he couldn't control. The vision ended as abruptly as it had started, leaving me gasping for breath. A cold hand gripped my shoulder, and I turned to face my tormentor. It was Harker, or what was left of him. A ghostly, decayed figure, his eyes hollow with despair. He spoke, his voice a whisper of pain and regret. He had been trapped, unable to move on, his spirit bound to the estate. His attempts to communicate had been interpreted as threats, his presence a source of fear. I realized then that Harker wasn't the malevolent force I had believed. He was a prisoner of his own making, tormented by his choices. He implored me to help him find peace, to complete the ritual he had started a century ago. It was a dangerous proposition, but I knew it was the only way to end the haunting of Maple Street. Gathering the necessary items, I prepared to perform the ritual. The wind howled outside, as if protesting against the impending act. I began, reciting the ancient words, the air around me vibrating with unseen energy. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light filled the attic, and a deafening roar echoed through the house. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The house was silent, the oppressive atmosphere gone. I collapsed, exhausted but relieved. The haunting of Maple Street was over, or so I thought. Days passed peacefully, and life on Maple Street returned to normal. But then, new whispers started, faint and distant. I realized with a sinking heart that while Harker's spirit had moved on, something else had taken his place, drawn by the ritual. The realization hit me. My actions had opened a door that I couldn't close. As I sit here writing this, I can hear the faint, sinister laughter creeping through the walls. In the weeks that followed, a heavy sense of dread hung over Maple Street. Sleepless nights became my norm as I tried to understand what I had unleashed. The entity, whatever it was, remained elusive, its intentions unclear. My research into the supernatural became an obsession. I learned about ancient entities, spirits, and curses, but nothing seemed to fit the peculiar nature of my adversary. It was as if this new presence was unlike anything documented before. One night, as I pored over my notes, a chilling realization dawned on me. The laughter I heard wasn't random. It was a form of communication, a pattern. I listened intently night after night, recording every sound, every whisper. Then, on a particularly cold and windless night, the entity revealed itself. Not through sounds or shadows, but through a dream. In this vivid dreamscape, I stood in front of my house on Maple Street, but it was different, distorted and menacing. A figure approached from the shadows. Not Harker, but a woman, her features obscured. She spoke in a voice that resonated with an unnerving familiarity. "You have freed one, but bound another," she said, her tone both accusing and sorrowful. I awoke with a start, her words echoing in my mind. The day was uneventful, but as night fell, an unexpected visitor arrived at my doorstep, a woman in her late 50s, her eyes holding stories untold. She introduced herself as Sarah, a descendant of the Harker family. Her visit, she explained, was prompted by strange occurrences she had experienced since the night of the ritual. As we talked, a horrifying possibility took shape. The ritual hadn't just released Harker. It had bound his tormentor to our realm. And this tormentor, it seemed, was Sarah's ancestor, a woman who had dabbled in the dark arts alongside Harker. Sarah revealed a family secret, a feud that had ended in tragedy, resulting in the curse that tied both spirits to the estate. The woman in my dream was her ancestor, and now she sought revenge for centuries of entrapment. We realized we had to act fast. The entity was growing stronger, feeding off the fear and anxiety of Maple Street's residents. We needed to find a way to banish her spirit, to undo the damage I had inadvertently caused. Our plan was risky, involving another ritual, this time to sever the link between the spirit and our world. We gathered the necessary items, each step fraught with uncertainty. The night of the ritual was unnaturally calm. As we began, the air around us crackled with energy. The entity materialized, her form more terrifying than anything I had imagined. She raged against us, her screams piercing the night. The ritual was intense, the atmosphere charged with a mix of fear and determination. And then, in a moment of eerie silence, it was done. The entity vanished. The oppressive presence that had haunted Maple Street lifted. Exhausted, Sarah and I shared a look of relief. But our celebration was short-lived. In the aftermath, something unexpected happened, a side effect of the ritual we hadn't foreseen. I began to experience visions, glimpses of events yet to happen, each filled with ominous portents. It was as if the ritual had opened my mind to something beyond normal perception. And then, the most chilling vision of all, a new darkness rising, not just in Eldridge but beyond. A force more sinister than anything I had encountered, its roots spreading far and wide. As I grapple with this newfound ability and the impending threat, I realize that my journey into the supernatural is far from over. Maple Street might be safe for now, but a larger battle looms on the horizon, one that I am inexplicably linked to.